Hey, what's up folks? How's it going? This is Watch. Hope you guys are all doing well. And today we're going to be doing a head-to-head camera comparison between the Google Pixel 5 as well as the iPhone 12. Now, both of these two have a standard wide camera as well as an ultra-wide camera. We're looking at the 12 megapixel stills capacity camera with the 4K at 60 frames per second video capabilities. Now, the actual sensor is actually very similar in terms of overall pixel size. You're looking at about 1.4 microns in terms of the actual pixel size. Both sensors have phase detection autofocusing with dual pixel phase detection technology, so the autofocusing is going to be fairly good. Optical stabilization, obviously. Now we'll switch over to the wide cameras to see how those look. Now here is the ultra wide cameras. Now you can see that on the iPhone we're a little bit wider in terms of field of view. It has 120 degrees field of view versus 107 on the Pixel, but the Pixel can actually shoot higher resolution stills at 16 megapixels versus 12 megapixels on the iPhone. You guys be the judge in terms of which looks best to you. But there is a difference in terms of actual frame rate capacity at the 4K resolution. The iPhone could shoot 60 frames per second in the ultra wide camera versus you're looking at 30 frames per second in 4K resolution on the Google Pixel. Now let's take a look at the front-facing side to see how those look. Okay, so here you're looking at the front-facing cameras. There is a pretty big difference between the two. You are looking at 8 megapixel stills on the Google Pixel versus 12 megapixels on the iPhone. In addition to that, you have limited capabilities on the Google Pixel. Video capturing capabilities, it pretty much tops out at 1080p 30 FPS versus the iPhone could shoot all the way up to 4K resolution at 60 frames per second. So there's definitely a big difference over here in terms of the front-facing video quality, and I think the iPhone is definitely the clear winner over here. We're going to move on to the actual comparison between the two, taking a look at a whole bunch of different examples: indoor, outdoor, low light photography, good lighting photography, also the portrait mode, to see which camera is best and which is ultimately the best smartphone camera. Okay, so let's go through a couple of different side-by-side examples to see how these two cameras are comparing against each other, shooting the exact same scene. And let's talk about sharpness. Now, the Pixel, in most occasions, especially when you're looking in well-lit conditions, is sharper. You have more details in the highlights and the shadows. A good example is of this scene in the lake where the tree line is better defined on the Pixels. You can see more individual branches as well as a better defined characteristics in the water. And on the iPhone, things look a little bit washed out, especially when you zoom in into that tree line specifically, and that's certainly not the case when we look at the Pixel. We do see a little bit more noise as we zoom in to the Pixel, and that's generally the characteristics where you do see a little bit more detail, but it always results in a little bit more of a noisier image compared to the iPhone, which is generally cleaner across the board. Now, another trend that I see when you're shooting with the Pixel, specifically in low light conditions such as this sunset scene, you can see that in the shadows things become pretty gray and fairly muddy compared to the iPhone. Take a look at the buildings on the shoreline over here. You can see that the windows and all the details are a little bit better defined. The black levels are a little bit more accurate and things look less muddy and gray compared to the shadow details we find on the Pixel 5. Furthermore, regarding the color rendition of the Pixel 5, one trend that I also see is at certain times the photo looks a little bit underexposed. There's still a ton of details still in the photo, both in terms of the mid-range highlights and shadows. In fact, more than the iPhone, but the Pixel chooses to kind of slightly underexpose the image compared to the iPhone. And generally, I find the white balance and metering system is a little bit more accurate on the iPhone 12. The Pixel favors a more cooler color temperature most of the time relative to the more warmer looking shots found on the iPhone 12. And you can also see this difference in portrait mode. With this example, you can clearly see that the iPhone 12 is certainly more warmer and favors that kind of color temperature look compared to the Pixel, which is actually a little bit more accurate to the true white balance setting based on the naturally lit conditions that the shot was captured in. Another thing is on the skin textures, you're going to notice on the iPhone they're a lot more smoother, a little bit more flattering and forgiving compared to the more sharper, higher contrast details found on the Pixel 5. And in terms of the fake bokeh effect or the out of focus elements, seem to be a little bit more realistically rendered and smoother on the Pixel 5 and look a little bit more pleasing to my eyes. Now, in terms of taking selfies on the front-facing camera, both of these cameras have the ability to do night or night sight mode, essentially the ability to take long exposure shots. And based on my experience, I think the Pixel 5 renders out a better looking image for selfies. The diffusion of light on the face itself is better distributed. You don't have these jarring shadows and highlight contrasty look that you find on the iPhone. And I think for taking selfies on the still side, I think the Pixel 5, even with its slightly lower resolution, is probably a slightly better camera, but I think for video the iPhone definitely wins. Now moving on, let's talk about the low light stills performance, specifically in night or night sight mode. Both of these have the ability to do long exposure photography with advanced stabilization, a feature we originally saw on a previous generation Pixel, and now a lot of smartphones have them. It's basically the ability for the camera to take a long exposure shot, and using machine learning predictive algorithms, the optical stabilization system in conjunction with the electronic stabilization system negates any kind of hand motion, so the resulting image is quite bright, clear, and with minimal noise. Now, the results of the Pixel 5 is quite good. We generally find a lot of details in the shadows, highlights, but compared to the iPhone, if you take a look at this shot specifically, when we start zooming into the fine details, yes, we see more details in the window frames of this building where the lights are turned off, and we see a decent amount of highlight information being retained as well. But alongside that, the Pixel does introduce a decent amount of noise compared to the relatively clean image that the iPhone 12 renders out. Yes, we do lose some shadow details on the iPhone 12, but take a look at the license plate on this van zoomed in. We can see pretty much the same level of details on the plate itself than we could see on the Pixel, but the Pixel is definitely a lot more noisy and certainly has a lot more artifacts as well, due to the fact that it's probably raising its ISO level up to bring you a little bit more details on the shadows. Now, if we zoom back out of the shot and take a look at it as a whole, I think both cameras do a remarkable job of rendering out a pretty amazing looking image, especially in these extreme low light conditions. Now, if we take a look at some other low light examples of this scene over here, you can see that the general color rendition, based on my experience of the actual scene itself, is actually more accurate on the Pixel 5. The iPhone 10's, again, with its warmer color bias to kind of distort the colors a little bit, but we also see finer details in the wood grain. We can also see that this little sticker says alarm a little bit more clear on the Pixel 5, and on the iPhone it's not as clear. So I would say that the night sight capability in kind of medium low light conditions is probably going to be better on the Pixel 5, especially when you're viewing the photo as a whole. Now, in terms of the 4K video capturing capabilities, when you are looking at this example over here, this is pretty much like a perfectly lit studio-like condition. There's not a huge difference between the two. Yes, you can see more contrast, kind of whiter whites, darker darks on the Pixel 5, which will kind of look a little bit sharper, but you're not seeing any more details that you're not seeing on the iPhone 12's 4K video. But when you go out in the real world and start shooting, there is a massive difference between the two. I think the Pixel 5 in sub-optimal lighting conditions introduces a hell of a lot of noise, and there's a lot of aliasing artifacts, and overall the sharpness and the overall clarity is just not as well defined as on the iPhone 12. Another big thing over here is the optical stabilization system in video mode is quite jarring at times on the Pixel. You can see a lot of motion artifacts, a lot of kind of weird things happening in different areas, and it's definitely not as smooth and as stable looking as the stabilized video on the iPhone 12. Now, I do have to say that I was fairly disappointed with the video performance of the Pixel 5. It was certainly not to the same level of quality expected from Google, and certainly not as good as the stylus capability of the phone, and definitely a big disappointment in my opinion. But generally speaking, if you're not shooting in suboptimal conditions, it's all right. But in most cases, a lot of smartphones are definitely better in terms of its video capturing capabilities, and certainly the iPhone is probably one of the best out there right now. Now, besides that, guys, that's really it. I definitely love to thank you guys for watching. Love to hear your thoughts in terms of which smartphone you think has the best camera out there. We are going to be doing an ultimate smartphone camera comparison video in a short while once we get everything all together and all of our tests done. So definitely make sure you're subscribed and have post notifications turned on so you get that video once it becomes available. Check out the description down below for more details about everything we've talked about. And if you go through any of our Amazon affiliate links, doesn't cost you anything extra, but helps us tremendously in supporting this channel and keeping this trend going. Big thank you to you for all your support throughout the years. Take care, and we'll see you soon.